live. Welcome back to another episode of The Professor and the Idiot. I'm Nick Wolfinger.
And I am Dalton Whitehead.
Yes, you are. Don't ever change, Dalton Whitehead.
Damn straight.
So this week, we did another interview. And rather than record the whole thing live, it was a little too long when it came out. So we've just selected a bunch of bits of the interview ranging from a minute to a couple minutes long. And we'll play each one and then give you our thoughts. So who did we interview? We interviewed a guy whose name I'm going to mispronounce, so I apologize to Kursat. It is Kursat Christoff Pekgoz. Kursat, as I'll call him, is a graduate student in English at USC, the University of Southern California. And Kursat got his name in the news a lot in the last week because he has filed several federal Title IX complaints arguing gender bias at a number of schools, including, I think the complaint that was discussed the most was the complaint at Cornell. And what Kursat is arguing is this. Colleges are 60%, almost 60% female at this point. So why is it that they still have a bunch of scholarships that are available to women only, as well as special resources for women like Women's Study Center and that kind of thing? Is this a good complaint? Is it fair that these scholarships still exist? We wanted to talk to him and get him to justify, or that sounds too value judgmenty, to say why he filed these complaints. So with that, I will play the first clip, and which Kursat explains a little about the complaint. And then, since I've already talked enough, I'll give Dalton the first shot at it. So here we go.
Yes, I'm basically asking for the end of, I guess, female-only programs or female-only scholarships. And in some institutions, there are also affirmative action preferences in hiring. And I think even student admissions, like Cornell, if I recall correctly, is 3 times more likely to admit a female student than a male student. And I think the University of Michigan likewise receives more applications from men, but they offer more admissions to women. So even on the level of admissions, we start with that. And then we have female-only scholarships. Sometimes it's massive. Like, as I said, Tulane distributes millions of dollars of scholarships to women only, even though they are the majority. So that's the second step. Then we have like women's studies departments and women's centers or women's resource centers. And those are basically advocacy centers. I don't know how else to put that. They transfer funds, like taxpayer funds, to these advocacy organizations which have only the interests of women in their mind. So they do not offer these resources on an equitable basis to whoever wants them. They have like a particular partisan perspective. And then we have sometimes what I call external affirmative action is when colleges give kind of like an additional boost to female employees who are looking for employment.
What do you think, Dalton?
You know, listening to that again and, you know, thinking about the interview after it took place, the women's departments and resources part, you know, for some reason it just doesn't bother me at all. It doesn't bother me that there's women's studies and, like you said, resource, or like women's only resources. That type of stuff doesn't bother me. The scholarships thing, I kind of see his point. So I'm kind of, part of me sees his point of almost like an affirmative action for women in colleges. So I can definitely see his side of that. But when it comes to women's studies classes, I just don't care about that. I don't think it's an issue, personally.
These are not classes that a lot of people take. You know, there are not a ton of women's studies classes, and they are indeed open to both men and women, and I think more women take them, but some women do. What about having men's studies? Would you be interested in that?
I guess. I mean, I think a lot of people might just say, well, like basically history. Well, other than like this sociological aspect, but like history is largely dominated by men. Because are there like women's history classes? You know, just like history of women.
There are. I don't know how widespread they are, but they do exist. And certainly you're right that most history has been made by men, but there are also real contributions by women. I
Yeah.
don't think in most history departments in the world nowadays that history would get overlooked and the valuable contributions of women would be overlooked.
Okay. I don't know. I think he does have a good point of like, well, if 60% of women are in college, do they need more help than men as far as getting into college?
Probably not in this day and age. I mean, certainly these programs were intended to address historical injustices towards women, which were very real and extended until just about 40 to 60 years ago. I think story I told a couple weeks ago bears repeating. It was when my mother tried to get a job at an ad agency in San Francisco in 1960, having done the same work in New York. And they said, the only jobs we have for you are secretary or typist.
Yeah.
And not only is that wrong, but that was illegal at the time. And so in that climate, coming out of that climate, I can certainly see the rationale for special accommodations for women.
Yeah, and I feel like I should have asked him, so if there were men's studies classes, men's only scholar, if there's the same thing but for men, would you be okay with that? Or would he want just total elimination of gender-based or gender-focused scholarships, admissions, classes?
Lest you forget, he talked about that at one point, and that's something he'll speak to in one of the clips we'll play later on.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, we can edit that bit out, Dalton.
No worries. He talks so much, it's hard for me to remember.
Right. Yeah, he said a lot. He's a bright guy, and he said a lot. So that was later. That's, I think, that's a good question about whether to create similar programs for men or just to eliminate all programs based on all scholarships based on gender and just make them universally accessible. I should say at the outset that I'm certainly sympathetic to the idea of not having gender preferences on campus, but one place they may still be useful to have special scholarships is in fields where women remain very underrepresented, like engineering.
What if, like, we talked about this, but choice is choice the biggest factor in why that is? I know you've mentioned in the past about becoming pregnant, marriage, and like those type of families, those type of factors, but becoming initially going into certain fields where women aren't as represented, is it
all choice or is it other things?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I wonder, because I mean, if all these women are going to college and they do have a lot of resources, I mean, if the majority of people going into engineering are men, is that necessarily a bad thing? Or, are we trying to coerce women into going into fields they might not necessarily want to?
I agree we shouldn't do that. And all I'd like to see is a level playing field. And one of the reasons is something I mentioned, the idea that the American economy suffers if it doesn't make use of all of its brain power, if there are any artificial barriers to participation by any segment of the population, for whatever reason, then the American economy isn't taking full advantage of all of its labor. So you're right. Certainly some of it, I would suspect, is simply by choice, that women aren't choosing to go into those fields. But if there are artificial barriers, to entry. I'd like to see them lowered.
For sure. Are there any barriers that come to mind when you think of that?
Before I speak to that, I just wanted to ask you, does that logic sound reasonable about wanting to maximize our human capital, use all of
No,
our brain
no,
power?
totally does. Yeah, because one human being can change the whole world. So
Yes, they
if we're
can.
utilizing, like you say, I like how you use that term, like all the brain power. You could, if you level the playing field and take out those obstacles, there's a very good chance that somebody could go into something that they might not been able to in the past, or maybe wouldn't have in the past, but did, and then go on to do great things.
I think we're in agreement here, and what we'd both like to see is just a level playing field, and the availability of a huge number of scholarships only to one gender seems like it would place roadblocks to make maximizing all of our brain power.
Yeah.
So certainly for that reason, I'm sympathetic to the complaint. So let me play. Why don't I play the next clip? And this is one of the ones that I think I'll object to more. But let's play it.
Okay.
Starting now.
Feminists have a lot of institutional power in academia that like men's rights activists do not have. So I mean, if we had a system in which, let's say, a class of male bureaucrats were expelling, women like all over the board, because I think somewhere between 95 to 99% of all expelled individuals across the country are men. And I think something like 73% of all Title IX administrators are women. So we have like a class of predominantly female bureaucrats expelling, like an exclusively male class of like students and professors. So that's really part of the equation here. So men's rights activists do not have that kind of institutionalized power. We don't have thousands of male-only scholarships for the male majority on college campuses.
That sounds more conspiratorial, I think, than I think really is the case.
Yeah, the women are in charge. They're keeping the man down.
Right. Yeah, I don't think. Now, so the place I will agree with him is in the enforcement of Title IX with respect to sexual misconduct. I think he's right there. But more broadly, if you go up into the higher levels of the administration, the people who really call the shots, there are still a majority of men in charge.
Like deans and presidents and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, above dean, even, people like the senior vice presidents and chancellors and shit like that. So that I'm not quite, I don't quite get that line of thinking.
Yeah, and part of me kind of feels that. Would you say the majority of sexual assault victims on campuses are female?
They are.
So I do kind of like the idea that people handling those cases are female, because maybe victims would feel more comfortable coming forward and maybe answering questions with somebody, like if it's a woman, complaining or answering questions to a female, I feel like would be a much better environment.
I agree with that. I think what Kursat is saying, and what I agree with, is that there is a extreme ideology that permeates the people who are not just receiving the complaints, but are also adjudicating over the trials for men. The ones who are judging them. And this is in accordance with how Title IX was distorted in 2011 by the Department of Education, which, if you're more interested in that, we talked about that at length a few weeks ago on our Me Too episode. So I think Kursat's totally right there. But more broadly, I don't see it.
So would he maybe just advocate for regulations of having 50-50 men and women? Well, I guess he would probably choose to almost eliminate these organizations, or groups or whatever. But do you think like a 50-50 split would change things?
Are we talking about university bureaucrats or what do you?
The Title IX.
Oh,
the people who oversee Title IX cases.
That system is fucked up. That system is really sick.
So it should just be totally eliminated?
I don't know. I don't think totally eliminated, but it needs real overhaul. That system, my take on Title IX, it's the original intent and the practice through much of its history, it was great. The original intent was you cannot discriminate on the basis of gender on a college campus, and I think that's important. And indeed, Kursat's complaint is a Title IX complaint to say you've gone too far in the opposite direction. But in 2011, the Department of Education says we're extending these rules to cases of sexual misconduct, to rape and sexual harassment. And there I totally agree with Kursat. There the system went off the rails and became a system that was basically geared to convict every student. And so that system is broken. It's just seems crazy to me that colleges are trying to try what can be felony cases. That's
crazy.
Yeah, I totally
for sure
agree.
Call the cops.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think that's what should happen with felonies. Now, every organization needs to be able to police harassment that doesn't break the law, but the current system isn't. Kursat is right. The current system isn't working and needs a lot of overhaul. And I've written about this, and a lot of people have written about this. Moving on, and let me play the third clip. It's also pretty short, only about a minute.
In your opinion, has society gotten to the point where we don't need gender-based departments, scholarships, and extra privileges? Should it all just be level playing field for men and women?
Yeah, I think so. That's what we are asking. I mean, I'm not asking for affirmative action for the male minority, and I'm also not asking for affirmative action for men in the disciplines in which they are underrepresented. So I guess if they really want to do that, the injunctive relief that we requested is like flexible enough. If they want to create, let's say, scholarships for men in nursing, in order to balance the female-owned scholarships that they have for STEM, for example, that's like a theoretically admissible approach, but I think it just makes things more cumbersome and really difficult to manage, because then you need more and more bureaucrats to calculate, like all the... Okay.
So we have actually another clip about that later on, but what do you think? Do you like his answer?
Yeah. He mentioned how women are more likely to go into the field of nursing.
Yes.
So is that because of obstacles or a non-level playing field? Or is that because of choices men are making?
I'm going to guess choices, but I don't really know the answer. I don't know much about nursing. I know
Okay.
that most nurses are women. I know that traditionally most nurses are women. I know that I don't know if we have enough nurses, if we need more, if there's a big shortage of nurses.
Well, I've always heard that like women generally go into fields of education and healthcare, nursing, and stuff like that. I don't know what it is with doctors and surgeons. I don't know what the percentage is there. But
I can answer.
oh, okay,
It's now med schools are now over 50%. They weren't traditionally. Traditionally, most doctors were men, but increasingly there will be fairly even numbers.
okay. I did like how he said he's not asking for affirmative action for fields where men are the minority. So to me, he doesn't seem to be like the woman hating type of MRA.
Yeah,
Uh,
I don't get that either.
yeah, they're great. Don't hate on them.
I agree.
So I do like that what he said there. You know, to him, I don't know. It's hard for me to argue a side on this because I mean, obviously, I'm for like equality, all that stuff we talked about before, but I don't have a dog in this fight,
Right.
so it's hard for me to get riled up about women's scholarships and stuff like that.
I would I think I'm in a similar place than you, but I'm more ambivalent. And I'm just more I think as I think about the issues he's presenting, I find them complex and I find myself seeing good arguments either way, which is really one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to Kursat and get his opinions.
Hmm.
I certainly think his he has some arguments that are serious that are worth he has some arguments that are worth taking seriously, which is why I wanted to do this.
Okay.
I thought you would appreciate the this idea of not having going to a system of having affirmative action for women in the fields with few women and affirmative action for men in the fields with few men.
Yeah, like it just seems like a major hassle, and it seems like a never-ending goal. Like it seems like if you wanted to go that route of trying to make everything perfectly 50-50, and you know, if one year a department has 52% female, and then the next year it's 48% female, like you're constantly trying to chase down that perfect balance of 50-50 and total equal representation no matter what, and whatever rules and regulations you want to implement to get that. So I do kind of like he seems to be just like, let's just stop it all. We're all just people. We're at the point now where we don't need to be doing that stuff, so let's just have none of it.
I think just listening to you talk, Dalton, you've helped to clarify my thinking on this because I started occurring to me. So suppose you set up a bunch of scholarships for men in programs where men are underrepresented, like nursing. Then what are you going to do in 5 years when the numbers change for some reason or another? And
Yeah, you're just constantly chasing that pendulum as it swings back and forth.
yes. And so some of these numbers may change, some of them may not change, but that'll be a moving target. That'll require constant evaluation. I'm not saying it would be impossible to do, but it's certainly a complex undertaking that would involve bureaucracy.
Yeah. Okay.
What we talked about this a fair amount, and so I think the fourth clip, which is the longest, which is a little over 2 minutes, let's play that because I think that will speak some to this question of support, whether we should still have special scholarships for women in fields where they're underrepresented. So I think the fifth one is pretty redundant, so let's just play the fourth one.
Okay.
Let me pose the need in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
One of the arguments we make in our book when we look at the gender imbalance in faculty, that this is an American economic liability. America is not using all of its brain power if there
Ah, shit, I said that earlier.
academia and some fields in academia are closed to women on any basis other than ability. And so that's certainly the argument of the book is about how we can level the playing fields, mostly concerning family accommodations. But that would be my argument for scholarships for women in STEM. It's simply an ineffective use of our human capital. Or inefficient use. Go on.
I mean, there's one STEM professor from an Ivy League institution who filed a similar complaint against his institution. Right now it hasn't been publicized, but it probably eventually will be. And I think like one of the arguments that he introduced into the narrative was that it's not really helping women either if you just kind of like force them into like STEM. And you know, like my sister is a scientist, so she finished her PhD. She lives in Vienna, and she specialized in microbiology. And I don't think she ever like received a female on a scholarship. So it's kind of strange to assume like that women who are interested in science will suddenly lose all their interest if they have to apply to these scholarships on an equal basis. I think women who want to pursue STEM will still pursue STEM, even if these scholarships are gender neutral. So I don't know if that makes sense.
I think yes, that makes sense, and I think there's logic to that.
If we are going to have like affirmative action for women in STEM, then again, I guess like the question is, why aren't we having affirmative action for men in the disciplines in which they are the minority, like nursing? And some people might say that's a theoretical question, but it's actually not.
No.
And nursing is...
All right. Well, that ended up making us repeat ourselves a lot.
That's all right.
Good. As my 7th grade teacher said when I asked why the textbook we're reading so often repeated the words, "There was an era of good feelings in the United States between 1816 to 1824. That sentence appeared over and over, and she said, "Repetition is the key to learning."
She should have said, "I didn't write the fucking thing. I don't know." I think he has a good point. I mean, it kind of touched on what we just talked about of, you know, if you're going to have these type of scholarships in this area for that reason, why not in a different area for the same reason?
Yeah, I think he's right. I don't think making the scholarships gender neutral is going to just keep anyone from applying to them. I think some of what's required in terms of making the science and engineering field more accessible to women is simply providing the reassurance that these fields are fields where women will feel comfortable.
Yeah. If you're a man, could you just identify as a female and get these scholarships?
I think that's the case with scholarships more generally, and indeed how the law is applied. So if you're going through security at the airport and you identify as a woman TSA agent will search you.
Oh, you know there's been some creeps that have used that rule.
If they know it. Oh shit, we're empowering creeps in this podcast.
No. Creeps don't listen to us. Only the good type of creeps.
So kids, when you're going through the TSA checkpoint, please identify as the gender you identify when you go through the airport. Use the gender you identify with elsewhere. Okay. I don't think.
You know, this is like maybe a year ago. This is a little while ago. I got accused of mansplaining on a little Facebook comment debate thing. And this girl, I didn't even know the girl who, she posted some dumb picture of like a chart, like, are you mansplaining? And there's like arrows to yes and no and all these other things.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I identify as a woman, so you're anti-feminist then.
You just mansplained me right now, Dalton.
But I'm a woman,
Oh.
so I didn't. And now I'm back to a man.
Getting back to that point, I think.
Good for you, Nick. Let's just let that go.
Okay. Oh man, I certainly am. Find some of his concerns about program balancing persuasive. Let me talk about something that's occurred between the time we did the interview last week and today, and that's the publication of a complaint by a similar Title IX complaint by a professor that Kursat identified in the interview named Mark Perry. I think he's at the University of Michigan. And so he's also filed Title IX complaints of a similar nature for gender equity. But this complaint was directed, or at least the implication of it was directed at a program to teach 13 to 17-year-old African American girls how to code, how to program computers. And I didn't see on Twitter the Kursat's complaint getting a lot of negative press, at least the people I followed. But when it sounds like someone's attacking a program teaching teenage girls how to program computers, that got a lot of negative attention.
Really? Wow.
I mean, yeah, that just seems sort of mean, right?
Like, to criticize that?
No, just to be going after a program teaching teenage girls how to code computers.
Oh yeah, to go after it. Yes.
Yeah, and saying no, this program because it's focused at girls is violating Title IX. That seems, my reaction to Kursat was it seemed like mission creep, right?
Yeah, because there's just certain times, like, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Exactly. And while I share his desire in some gender neutrality in higher education, that was a step I wasn't ready to endorse. Yeah, that just seemed mean and like a bad idea. And certainly that was Twitter's reaction.
Yeah, when people have like a cause or something like political goals, whenever they just being mean, just like that, just like, all right, we get your point, but you're not convincing anybody by
that just was
you're just making everybody dig in their heels.
Exactly. It was not. Yeah, it was. It's like back since I'm a little older. I remember when Larry Flint, the editor of Hustler, was a big free speech advocate, and the response often was, "Yeah, I believe in free speech, but can you find a better example?"
Yeah, something not so raunchy.
I mean, yeah, he was an advocate for speech, and occasionally it was valuable, but it wasn't always. It just didn't always put the best face on it. If that makes sense.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah. Nothing against Hustler. Where are we at with this? Is there anything else we want to say about this?
I feel like I had something. I don't know. Where do you see us going? Do you see people like him starting a movement, getting rid of these programs? What do you think about the future of gender-based scholarships, programs, and all that.
I think he has started a movement, and I think he's asking a really good question and raising a valid point. Here were programs that were at one point necessary to redress inequities that had existed for centuries, because for centuries there was not equality before the law.
Do you think we'll ever reach the point where we don't even have to worry about this stuff?
That's a good question, and that's a really too broad, Dalton. Too broad.
Yeah, maybe not in our lifetime.
But I appreciate his bringing this question to our attention, because I think it's, no matter how you feel about the issue, I think it's a valuable opportunity to reflect on, really a big, a constitutional issue. How do we interpret the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution? Which is really, I think, how, Title IX is Title IX is something emanating from the Due Protection Clause. Right?
Yeah.
And so I think this is this is a fairly new direction for that kind of complaint. Usually it's been about arguments pro and con for affirmative action based on race and ethnicity. So gender is a new question, is a new topic.
Eventually we'll all just tap into the internet and download ourselves, and we'll be no gender. We won't even have to worry about it.
Oh, well, we talked about that a couple of weeks ago, though. I think we agreed when we talked about the Gillette commercial. We don't want that either.
Yeah.
Or at least I don't.
I like masculine things, and I like feminine things.
Let me draw upon my professor knowledge and talk about someone who may end up being a supporter of Kursat's proposal, if it ever gets to the Supreme Court. That is, if his complaints to the federal government produce a lawsuit. And that is what Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the feminist hero, got famous for. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is a personal hero. She's done great things for American society. Before she was on the Supreme Court, when she was a lawyer, she was involved in a bunch of cases that established gender equity before the law. And I don't know if you know the story, but she wouldn't sue on behalf of female clients. She would sue on behalf of male clients.
Wow, that's interesting.
So there used to be a ton of different laws. I think I told you 50 years ago, women couldn't always get credit cards in their own names, and there were laws about Social Security and survivors benefits that were gender specific, written for widows and widowers. And so it's that kind of complaint that she sued on, and she wanted equal rights for women, so she sued on behalf of male clients, and she secured those rights.
Wow. So that was her route to get what she...
Yeah.
There was a much more likelihood of success going that route.
I would assume that's why she did it.
Yeah.
But it worked.
Well, it's good to hear. I don't know too much about her. I've only recently, she's come up with the whole Kavanaugh thing. Definitely put a spotlight on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, she's great. I mean, just in the last year, there was a theatrical biopic about her, and then there's, I think, is it out? Just came out a fictional, a dramatized account of her. Is that out yet? Of her younger life and filing this kind of lawsuit. And so she's been there. She's 85. She's been on the court for a long time, and sort of acquired semi-rock star status. Anyhow, she has also, in the last year, she criticized just as Kursat and I have, the campus sexual assault tribunals as being unfair to accused men.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, so she's certainly a feminist hero, but she hasn't always made organized feminist groups happy with statements like that.
Well, fuck them. She knows more than all you guys, so listen to the lady.
She does. All right, so I don't feel like I've answered many questions this week, but I feel like I've certainly raised some questions. I don't know. Anything you want to add?
No, for the people listening, if you have a question or want to add something, feel free to comment or send us a private message or anything. I'd be more than welcome to answer fan questions or anything like that. So I don't know. If there's a question you would have asked him, feel free to send it in and we can kind of openly ask the question and discuss it.
Yeah,
so.
we could even bring him back if you want.
Yeah.
I felt like I was getting a scoop when he agreed to participate because I knew about the lawsuits and I had been talking to him about it. Not the lawsuits, the complaints. I had been talking to him for a while. I had baited signing on to the petition and ultimately didn't sign on. But a lot of people signed on. One of the signatories was Jordan Peterson. And so a lot of people signed on to his complaint. And so I asked him if he'd be willing to talk to us. And then that same week there was an op-ed, I think in favor of the complaint in the USA Today. So I suddenly felt like I was beating him to the punch. Or not beating him to the punch. I felt I was beating a lot of other media to get him on this pod.
We are on the cutting edge.
Always. Do you have a cutting edge recommendation for our listeners this week?
I actually do, and this is something I would love for you to watch. It's this little, I don't know if you call it a documentary, but do you know who Michael Cernovich is?
Oh, yes. I sort of wish I didn't, but yeah.
He released I had heard about this film. He released this movie called Hoax. It's all about media, fake news, and all that stuff. I would love it if you watch this, and then we discussed it. And I'm not endorsing anything.
Yeah.
I'm just saying I watched this film. I would love for you to watch it and for us to discuss
all right.
it.
I mean, Cernovich is an asshole who's responsible for a lot of fake news himself.
Well,
but
he kind of gets into that a little bit. He kind of mentions stuff maybe he shouldn't have said. But I thought it was pretty interesting because, they interviewed quite a few people and, showed some pretty interesting examples of how news has spread truth and twisted and misrepresented a lot of things. It was pretty interesting.
I don't doubt that. I'm just not inclined to take Cernovich as providing the definitive account of how often that happens. But sure, I'm happy.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't so much. I mean, it was a little bit about him, obviously, but it wasn't solely about him. I thought it was pretty interesting. I'd be very curious to see what you think about it.
I like to consume political thought from across the political spectrum. I've occasionally been cautioned by even listening to people like Cernovich to formulate responses. I'm sort of miscalibrating because it's, he's so
off
the wall, wrong about everything.
Well, it's $5 on Vimeo.
Okay.
So if you feel like spending $5, I'd love for you to watch it. Then we could.
Oh shit! But does that mean he's getting my $5? I'm not happy about that.
Yeah. He is. I'm sure he's not getting the full 5. I bet Vimeo's getting something.
Okay. That would make me feel a little better.
And maybe the people in the documentary are getting paid, so maybe he's only getting like $1 or 2.
All right. I could probably live with that. All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you very much.
See you next week, everyone. If you
Bye-bye.
like what you heard, give us a positive rating on, all those places.
Yeah, you know.